first, my parents. They obviously spend so much money for us to do the activity. They've made so much sacrifices, not only monetarily, but in terms of time. And so your endless support allows us to do what we love. Second, to our coaches. First, we'd like to thank Mr. Clemens for always staying after school and spending time with us to go over arguments. Your constructive criticisms, snarky remarks, and road rage have made debate a great experience for all of us. Secondly, Mr. Washer, thanks for giving us the foundation of debate. Without you, this program, which previously was unrecognized, wouldn't become, the national powerhouse that it is. And then to our assistant coach, Nishan, he's not here right now. But the reason why Nishan and I are able to have so much success is because all the hard work that he puts in to work with us. And then lastly, Sam Asbell. He's the best hype man and freestyler around. He's an incredible help with the round robin. And shout out to Flex Debate. It's awesome. Thirdly, our friends, Anush, Max Wu, Elizabeth, Abi, Krung, Siddharth, Santiago, Zil, Sebastian, and then all the second year novices, and then Michelle again. We love you guys. You make debate awesome. And then also thank you to our opponents. Hope you have a great round. And then lastly, thank you, Anush. You are the red to my acted. You are the pink to my blue. You are the woody to my Buzz Lightyear. You've been together since birth, and everyone ready? Communicate. Our sole contention is preventing a global solution. In an increasingly interconnected world, an attack on one country's network is an attack on all. As world leaders have come to recognize the widespread devastation cyber warfare can bring, the potential for global efforts on cybersecurity cooperation to form is higher than ever. In fact, Rangan of the National Law Review 2019 explains that nations with heavily competing interests, like China, Russia, England, and Germany, have for the first time signaled a willingness to engage with each other to improve global cybersecurity and reduce the threat that cyber attacks pose. As a result, Dominic, this Institute of Political Studies in 2018 finds that small regional cybersecurity agreements have been forming. The African Union has established a framework for African cyber cooperation. The League of Arab States adopted a convention to establish cyber norms, and America has led separate cybercrime initiatives through the Asian Pacific Economic Body and the Organization of American States. However, America's use of offensive cyber operations have prevented these individual agreements from progressing into global, international level cooperation by creating a security dilemma and breaking down trust. As American offensive capabilities continue to build up, so too does the desire for other countries to follow suit. Valeriano of the Cato Institute in 2019 writes that the Trump administration's strategy of accelerating the use of offensive cyber operations risks exacerbating fear in other countries and creates a self-reinforcing spiral of tit-for-tat escalation. Even if U.S. operations were perfectly regulated and only used sparingly, Slayton of Cornell in 2017 explains that the mere uncertainty over the intentions to launch offensive cyber attacks leads countries to assume the worst-case scenario, breaking down trust and making our adversaries more reactive. Empirically, Moore for the Journal of Global Security Studies in 2017 finds that America's use of offensive cyber capabilities operations against Iran led to a flurry of activity designed to improve and rationalize the use of cyber weapons, and militaries across the world ramped up investment to increase offensive capabilities. Overall, Richard Ledick, former deputy director of the NSA, points out that more than 100 countries around the world are now capable of launching cyber attacks. With the entire world militarizing, no country trusts each other enough to form an agreement. This escalation spiral thus precludes the possibility of global cooperation from ever occurring. Ultimately, Goldsmith of the Hoover Institute in 2011 explains that the United States is widely viewed as a major source of cyber attacks and exploitations, as well as a major spur to the cyber arms race. In fact, as more information technology experts from around the world have expressed concerns about the United States as a source of computer network attacks than any other country. As a result, Goldsmith concludes that for our government to receive the concessions that international cooperation can bring, it must clamp down on its own capabilities. Put simply, we aren't going to get restraint from our adversaries unless we restrain ourselves. Critically, international cybersecurity cooperation is necessary for sustained global progress. This is because, while developed nations have access to funds and technology necessary to build up their cyber defenses, developing nations remain incredibly vulnerable. International agreements can alleviate this by encouraging information sharing and the diffusion of defensive technology, while preventing attacks from occurring in the first place. Solberg of the Norwegian Institute for International Affairs in 2018 thus concludes that a global effort is necessary to strengthen cyber capabilities in developing nations. is especially important for developing nations, which have digitized their development process without ensuring proper security measures are in place. A UN report found that unprotected infrastructure, banking, healthcare, and other government services leave developing countries the most vulnerable to cyber attacks, which have the potential to trigger conflicts and put the entire development process at risk. Critically, economic development increases wages, creates jobs, lower prices, and lifts entire populations out of poverty, which is why the McKinsey Institute in 2015 finds that over the last 50 years, global growth has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty.
Similar to like Max did, I'm going to give a couple quick thank yous before I start my speech. First off, I want to thank Florida Blue Key for hosting such an incredible tournament and the University of Florida for providing us with such great facilities throughout this weekend. Also, a special thanks to two North Broward alums and two of my close friends, Tyler and Max, for helping us out this weekend. I'd also like to thank my opponents, Max and Anush. We've been friends for quite some time now, and I'm glad we're friends. I'm also really excited that there are two Florida teams in the finals this year, unlike last year. And I can't wait for a really good debate. Next, I'd like to thank my coaches, specifically Shri Aswari. He's at Michigan right now with our policy team. But thank you so much for being such an inspiration and role model in my life. Also to our assistant coach, Kagan Ferguson. Kegs, I don't really know what to say to you. None of this would have been possible without you and your guidance. Your topic prep was also pretty good, so thanks for that. I also want to extend another huge thank you to North Broward Prep Fine Arts Department, specifically Mr. Chris Petrucci, for making this entire tournament possible. And one little quick one, I want to thank Zach Sumi. You're right there. He showed up just for this debate today. My biggest role model in debate. I'm really glad you could come. A couple more specific thank yous. I'd like to thank my teammates, Kaylee, Cassie, Tyler, and Grant. Thank you all for being so supportive and helping us laugh when we're super mad at each other. I'd also like to thank Keenan for helping us judge at this tournament. We wouldn't have been able to come without you. We needed to judge last minute. You filled in. Appreciate that. I'd also like to thank my parents for allowing me to compete and pursue my passion for debate without everyone else. Without you guys, it wouldn't have been possible. And last but not least, I'd like to thank Drew. We've come a long way. We've screamed at each other a lot at this tournament, especially during the round robin. But I'm glad it's come together. I'm sorry we missed homecoming, but I hope the finals of Blue Key was a good consolidation. All right, with that being said, is everybody ready to begin? We affirm and our first contention is defeating ISIS. ISIS currently uses the internet to maintain power. As Rastin explained, that ISIS has found a way to do something other terrorist organizations had not. It turned the web into a weapon, as ISIS routinely used encrypted apps, social media, and splashy online magazines and videos to spread its messages, find recruits, and launch attacks. A response required a new kind of warfare, and so the NSA and US Cyber Command created a secret task force, a special mission, and an operation that would become one of the largest and longest offensive cyber operations in US military history. Offensive cyber operations can take down ISIS's entire global network. As Rostic concludes, that once operators were inside the US network, they began opening backdoors and dropping malware on servers. US cyber operators had the skill to do a cyber equivalent of a surgical strike, attack the ISIS material on a server without taking down the civilian material sitting right next to it. Leadership talked about not just ISIS in Iraq and Syria, but how to take down the operation's entire global network. Ultimately, the article concludes that these attacks are successful. That prevents global attacks, as Lister 2018 explains, that the Islamic State has conducted or inspired more than 140 terrorist attacks in 29 different countries other than Iraq and Syria, and these attacks have killed at least 2,000 people and injured thousands more. Their devastation has been even worse within the surrounding region, as Jamison in 2019 explains, that at least 19,000 people have been killed in ISIS-linked violence in under 2 years, with millions of others forced from their homes and thousands more being held as slaves. As quote, the violence remains staggering as ISIS continues to commit crimes against humanity and possible genocide. Our second contention is preventing cyber attacks, as focusing on defense leaves us weak. As Lewis explains in 2016, that a purely defensive approach cedes the initiative to the opponents and leaves the defender in a reactive posture. The growing military dimension makes cybersecurity essential for national strategic development. But offensive cyber operations can deter and prevent OCOs from occurring, as attacks from occurring, as Goldsmith in 2012 explains that if we detect an attack, the Department of Defense can conduct an operation to counter threats in cyberspace. Defense has to be a part of our offensive measures, as officials noted success tracing and identifying the attacker through algorithms. This is a big deal for cyber deterrence, as the Pentagon has capabilities and the desire to engage in preemptive attacks against imminent cyber threats. The U.S. has sophisticated cyber technology and that is willing to deploy in a preemptive fashion. Only deterrence can resolve future cyber attacks. As Franklin Kramer in 2012 of the Center for Technology and National Security Policy in 2012 explains that cyber attacks can be prevented, as a cyber deterrence strategy could ultimately contribute to the assurance of allies, dissuasion, and readiness to defeat adversaries. Actors can be dissuaded from entering into cyber competition, and the dangers of cyber aggression will ultimately diminish. Deterrence depends on the capacity of the U.S. to project an image of capability in sufficient strength. Cyber attacks on the grid are extremely vulnerable now, as current security measures fail. As Jelton explains, that a cyber attack could produce an even bigger blackout, even bigger than the 2003 outage, which left 50 million people in the dark. Hackers could shut down a key part of the U.S. power grid, and security experts are moving quickly, but threats may be evolving even faster. Most companies fail to implement voluntary cybersecurity standards, and attempts to legislate standards have been rebuffed because the power industry has been opposed to them. Redesigning the grid will be very expensive, and consumers will be stuck with higher rates. Ultimately, cyber attacks will be aimed at vital systems. As Wheeler in 18 explains, that cyber attacks will likely be strikes against industrial control systems, transportation networks, and healthcare providers because infrastructure is out of date, poorly maintained, and ill understood. The impact is economic collapse. As cyber attacks collapse the global economy, as the Atlantic Council in 2014 explains, that complex interconnectedness among financial institutions risks for a cascading catastrophe. Complexity contributed to the crash in 2008, and failure in one part of the U.S. market could lead to a global recession and the collapse of governments. Even fears for the future cybersecurity professionals pay little attention to how the risk might emerge from technologies, and strong computer security systems won't shield companies from subprime cyber failure. A significant chain of disruptions to an interconnected system could bring the entire global economy crashing down. The impact is massive poverty. As Bradford in 2013 explained, that 900 million people could fall back into poverty in the event of an economic shock like the last Great Recession. For all of these reasons, Andrew and I are proud to affirm. Right. Everybody good?
Yeah. Okay, so on your 2003 example of when the United States power grids were attacked, why did the power grids go offline?
Because somebody hacked them. Can I ask a question?
No, wait. What did the U.S. government report say?
I'm assuming you're going to tell me what the U.S.
Yeah,
government report
it's because
says.
trees cause disruptions to power grids.
So trees cause 50 million people to go into a power outage.
Yeah.
Most power outages caused by trees put maybe 1,000 people. When we live in Florida, you know FBL when the power goes out, right?
Yeah, of course.
There's never 50 million people impacted by that. It was a
but it's like
long-term power.
across the country.
No, so trees caused wait, this doesn't make any sense. Our evidence from 2003 says that one cyber hack led to the attack of 50 of the cyber grids, which pushed 50 million people into like energy poverty for a short period
United
of time.
States government said that the attack
That
was not
makes
caused by cyber
literally
attack,
zero sense.
but was caused by
Okay.
tree damage. to
Yeah,
the-
personally, yeah, as funny as that might sound, I'd love to see that evidence, and
We
more
have it.
importantly, we would contest this is not the same thing, it's fundamentally
Yeah,
different.
it is. It literally
Okay,
talks about
so
the-
now that you're clowning my arguments, I'm going to start clowning yours. So specifically, on your second contention about African cyber attacks, or about like Africa, right?
Yeah.
So, quick question.
Yes.
Do you have any examples of cyber attacks on developing countries in the status quo?
Yes, we do. The Financial Times explains
Yeah.
that Sub-Saharan Africa, $3 billion of GDP was taken
Gotcha.
out.
So, quick question. Africa's economy is $6.4 trillion. Why is theft of 0.00015% of Africa's GDP
Yeah, so-
enough to halt their development for hundreds of millions of people?
Yeah, so it's one attack. The UN report explains that without ensuring proper development and security for the digitization,
Yeah.
you threaten the collapse of the entire
So,
development process.
yeah.
You can see that one example is like a low cost, and that might be
Yeah.
true, right?
Yeah,
But
it
it's
might be true.
indicative of a broader example
Okay.
of rogue hackers being able to attack
You
the
say it's a
systems.
broader example, but I
Yes.
asked for
You asked for an
evidence.
example, I gave you an example.
Okay, give
We
me
can
another.
give you another one.
Okay,
Like
we can do this all day. Oh, later. Okay, cool.
But yeah, but it's also, the UN report is very explicit that without proper
Yeah.
security, the potential
No,
exists.
I'm just
And
kind of misunderstanding how 0.00001%
I
of
understand
a
you
country's
misunderstand
GDP
it,
can
because
be
that's
harmed.
not the point.
Well, it
The
is.
idea-
That's the argument.
The idea is that just, that one attack might be that small number,
Okay.
but like a continuous attack
Yeah.
thwart the development process, and the UN report specifically says that without
Okay.
proper security, the development process literally cannot.
All right, we'll see about that.
Yeah, okay. So on your second contention,
On my
your
second.
impact about economic collapse.
Yeah.
So can you explain like the link between like shutting down a power grid and then like
Yeah,
global risk?
that's a great question. So I think it's our Atlantic Council evidence from 2014 is extremely good on this question, and I encourage everyone spectating and judging to call for this evidence because it's really good. What it says is that essentially economic collapse is highly probable because of interconnected linkages within the US economy. The evidence goes on to say that any small disruption in anything about electricity or a power grid could lead to the entire global economy passing down. It's the same warranty in the 2008
So is it like
recession.
companies like shut down? Like I'm confused. Like why does it cause?
You can call for the evidence. We have 2 seconds left, so. Do you want to see it? Be like professional.
Can I see that?
I have a couple of thank yous to give. First, to Max, we've been together since day one, and it's honestly great to find like a partner that does literally anything. Speaking of partners, to Jasper, my yin to my yang, my dumb to my dumber, Harold to my Kumar, debating without you by my side has been a little different and a lot better for the reasons that I've previously stated. I miss you and I hope we keep in touch. Also, shout out to ART and Gidget and Company. And also, I think Max forgot to thank Tibet. I'm just going to go now. On your first connection about ISIS, first of all, the government doesn't need to be the one that takes out ISIS recruitment processes. Artificial intelligence is doing it by itself. Newton of the Verge explains that Google and Facebook's artificial intelligence-based programs scan platforms for ISIS activity, having removed more than 3 million pieces of propaganda. But even if you are able to temporarily disable terrorists, you're not tackling the root cause of terrorism. Thrall of the Cato Institute explains that America's military presence is a powerful recruitment tool for terrorists, and that counterterrorism efforts have not managed to take out terrorist groups, instead creating power vacuums where new ones fill them in. Affirming fuels these feelings of anti-American sentiment for 2 reasons. First of all, America's offensive cyber operations are a sign of America's imperialism and militarism, so even if it's not boots on the ground, terrorist groups can still use any form of America's influence as propaganda to further their movement. But second, because offensive cyber operations increase America's use of military interventions. Lim of NextGov explains that offensive cyber operations will be used for intelligence gathering and reconnaissance, ultimately reducing the perceived risk of U.S. military interventions, which, according to the New York Review, makes it politically easier to justify more intervention. For example, when computer systems were integrated into battlefield command, Bush and Clinton were able to use more military force with relative impunity than any other commander since Roosevelt. Ultimately, Gompert-Wren concludes that cyber attacks can act as pathways to the use of military force, and that's really important because Lucas of the CRG concludes that U.S. military interventions have taken 30 million innocent lives. Now, let's go to the second contention about deterrence. First of all, they started by saying that defense is not an effective deterrent. There's not much of a why. 3 responses here. First of all, you can always pick when you go offensive, but you can never pick when we defend. Literally every 39 seconds the United States gets hacked, and we defend against all of it. Our defense is a super strong deterrent. Second, we spend the most on cyber defense. According to the IB Times, only 1.2% of our spending is on offensive cyber operations. So the fact that we spend so much more on defense indicates that our defense is our deterrence because spending is the largest global signal of American hegemony. But third of all, the United States has hundreds of other ways to retaliate if Russia hacks our grids. But the only unique way to defend against those hacks is by having cyber defense. OCOs don't create any unique deterrence. The only unique deterrence is our ability to defend against a cyber attack. All this is terminal defense on their case. Because even with just defense, Russia is still always deterred from attacking our grid because we can always retaliate them in any other way. The only way we can defend is with cyber defense. Then I'd say that OCOs aren't enough of a deterrent for 2 reasons. First of all, according to Barnes and the New York Times, when the United States uses OCOs, we expose our technology and decoding for the attack for other countries to steal for themselves. Second of all, Levicki of Rand explained that cyber attacks are single-use weapons. Once we exploit a terrorist group's vulnerabilities with a hack, we can identify and fix it. Same goes with Russia. Third, an American offensive cyber approach leads to global militarization. Russell of the ECFR finds that America adopting offensive cyber operations has prompted other countries like France, England, and Netherlands to all shift from their cyber doctrines from an exclusive focus on cyber defense towards cyber offense. As their allies militarize, their rivals will militarize in response, causing a global arms race that breaks down trust and significantly increases the chance of conflict. And attacks on other countries' power grids go up by a lot. Now, let's go to their impact. They tell you that power grids kill investor confidence, and that leads to 900 million people going to poverty. Lots of problems. First, the damage can't be done. A, according to Forbes, the United States this year modernized their grid using manual and analog technology that can't be hacked into. B, the EPA finds that the power grid is super decentralized. And C, Wood of the BRT finds that our system has huge reserve margins. If power goes out, there's enough to back it up. In fact, Barrett of Wide concludes that literally squirrels do more damage to US grids than hackers. Second of all, there's no contextualization of how much they reduce confidence. Like, for example, the trade war was a tangible reduction in trade and interaction, and that didn't reduce investor confidence enough to cause a recession. Their impact is super untangible. Third of all, their evidence is just that an economic shock will throw 900 million people into poverty. But the housing bubble, and the uncertainty caused by Brexit, the credit bubble, and the huge amounts of private sector debt mean that their impact of recession is inevitably going to happen, and there's no reason why their link into that impact is uniquely worse than any of the others. But fourth of all, an attack that causes that much damage has mutually assured destruction. No country like Russia would never attack American power grids if it causes that much damage, because it would assure retaliation that does the exact same thing to them.
Can we see Forbes decentralized and decentralized?
Yeah.
Not school card.
That was 50 seconds total. So we have a minute, 2 minutes time.
I guess before I begin, I'll also echo some thank yous that Tyler already said or don't make sense for Tyler to say. So first, I'd like to echo the thank yous he said about anyone who's here from like North Broward with us, Max, Tyler, Zach, Kaylee, Cassie, Tyler, Grant, and of course Kagan. We wouldn't be here without you, and all your help has really kept us sane at this tournament. Also, I'd like to thank my parents for letting me come to this tournament, even though they're not here. Their support means the world to me. And it wouldn't make much sense if Tyler thanked himself, but definitely would like to thank Tyler for stepping up the prep a little on this topic, as I was kind of busy on college applications. But you know, he did it without much sort of pressure, and I really thank the world for that. And of course, I'd love to thank Lake Highland for being friends with the circuit and creating a great final. Okay, starting on our case. Start on our our case. We're going to agree that AI does a lot of these top-shelf responses, but kind of sort of kicks out of these terms because it means that the U.S. still creates this imperialist mindset if a company from the United States is sort of taking off the arguments they talk about. But also, our Ratson evidence sort of is better and outweighs all these terms that we talk about. Even if we have sort of a use of military force, we tell you specifically it definitely doesn't link to like 330 million lives specifically in this area. And if we take ISIS off the internet, that definitely outweighs sort of the amount of lives that we'd be taking in the long term as they can't destroy regions. Then they read you 3 reasons for why defense works better. Group their first 2 because it doesn't really interact with the Lewis evidence at all. They just say it's like the only way we can defend. But the Lewis evidence sort of takes this a step further and finds there will always be vulnerabilities in our cyber defense, which is why OCOs are sort of the only risk that we actually have of deterring the threat. Their third one says there's always a fear of retaliation. 1, our form of deterrence is better because it doesn't cause the direct life of loss in their world. Instead, there's sort of you have to use these weapons to create real deterrence. But secondly, that the international theory of deterrence doesn't apply to their case. Deterrence says you need a proportional response. However, doing a cyber attack, a drone strike isn't a proportional response, which means it violates international norms, and countries aren't scared of that. Then their first argument is that talks about how countries are going to like steal our weapons. That's a reason we need sort of more OCOs, because if we tell you that attacks are inevitable, which they really didn't respond to well in this argument from the Wheeler evidence, then we tell you specifically we need OCOs to be able to get past these sort of attacks and find better ways to do these attacks. Also, it doesn't really matter because our Goldsmith evidence says we take their servers offline, which means even if they have our code, they can't attack us. Then they tell you that we create global militarization of sort of OCOs. That's good. Ray finds in 2013 that if we have that actually happen, then countries are less likely to attack sort of these through cyber attacks because they're sort of fear retaliation. It's the principle of deterrence. The Wheeler evidence hasn't really been responded to at all. It says a grid attack is coming right now specifically. Then they read you a bunch of responses, but that one that was specifically our grids are solved right now. No, Smith in 2019 finds that even past that there's still major vulnerabilities in our grid despite that. And then they say it's decentralized, but that doesn't matter because our evidence sort of tests even despite that there's some parts of decentralized, there's still vulnerabilities that we can actually hack into and cause it to happen. And then they say it's like they can use a different power grid. Then there's always a backup. That's literally our argument is from specifically the Wheeler evidence that we're going to get through these grids and actually cause the cyber conflict to happen. Then they tell you that like there's sort of recessions already going to happen right now, and we don't explain our argument at all. When the grid literally goes out on the eastern coast, companies can't operate anymore, and our Atlantic Council evidence is really good on this and says it sort of spills over. The MAD argument doesn't make any sense because retaliation, you need OCOs to happen, which means it's an app argument. On the top of their case, they first tell you that escalation is going to happen. That's good because it actually prevents attacks. Drogan finds in 2013 that it creates this sort of cyber mutually assured destruction, which means China, Russia, and all these other countries that would be attacking developing nations aren't going to do anymore because they fear our OCOs. But then their sort of argument is that then Russia and China are going to all sign this global deal. Bunch of reasons they're not. First change in 2013 finds the countries have no incentive to sort of trust the U.S. or sign any of these deals. Instead, we need to abandon that and actually sort of use deterrence against them. But secondly, we would tell you there's no real explanation or reason why Russia would actually trust the United States to halt OCOs now. They just say they want agreements without providing no warrants. But third, even these agreements don't actually solve the root of the problem. The existence of non-state hackers and the lack of attribution ability means enforcement of agreements is impossible. Yeltsin finds in 2010 that the attack perpetrated by random non-state hackers cannot be prevented by these agreements, which means there are always going to be sort of these hacks that happen they talk about. But fourth, even if they see that all these countries want to sign these agreements, the U.S. doesn't. Siegel finds in 2018 that the U.S. has no reason to trust all these countries, which means the agreement, even without OCOs, happens. But also, even if there is agreement, it takes a really long time. Nye finds in 2019 that it would take like 20 years. It would take a really long time because a nuclear agreement, for example, took 20 years to actually happen. But specifically, there's no enforcement of this treaty. Only OCOs can allow that. First is that we sort of coerce these countries and actually allow for there to be a punishment when we see this specifically happen, which means OCOs are the only way to solve this argument. Lake Highland has no clear explanation for why global cooperation would lead to tech diffusion on their impact. They just say agreements lead to tech diffusion. There's no real explanation of that argument at all. But we'd say OCOs are better to actually prevent these countries on the impact. Bogart finds in 2019 that most OCOs are used for intel, which means we can give to these developing countries to help protect it. They only have one example of $3 billion being solved. Then question mark that the development trap for actually these countries. Make them prove to you where this happens. They tell you the OCOs are really high right now, but there's only been one attack that they give you an example of. They just say it's part of the broader trend. No examples of that, no evidence on that. They just lead to a bunch of question marks, so that leads to a development trap of millions of lives.
We're going to take some time. Wait, can we see the Siegel evidence at the U.S. level population? We'll keep probably also.
is 217 is.
Okay. Alright. So if you say there's mutually assured destruction with cyber attacks, why is everyone hacking each other?
Well, we would tell you like major attacks aren't really happening. That's like sort of the mutual destruction happening. There's probably some small attacks on other companies that don't have really major.
Like $3 billion
impacts.
after GDP.
Well, we tell you again, like Crossfire, that really hasn't responded to well. Is that that's like 0.0000.
Okay, the United Nations evidence, which you don't respond to, says their entire development process is at risk.
No, we would tell you how. Like again,
I can explain how, because
So, like,
banking,
yeah.
healthcare,
But there's
financial
been one
system
attack,
is all based off
3
digital. No, there hasn't only been one attack. UN report is an
One attack.
examination of.
okay, how many attacks are there?
How do you, there's not a specific number. You yourself tell me we can
Okay.
trace how many attacks.
Can you give
there
me
are.
another example than the 3 billion?
Why does that matter? Yeah, the amount of hacks against Africa doubled in the last year.
Did you read that anywhere? Like
Yeah, just
also-
now.
Okay.
Second cross is late. Just ask me a question.
Well, we like
You
talk
can ask.
about sure. I guess let's talk about this sort of ICE agreement, right? So you tell me specifically that if we take them offline, right? That sort of gives us an incentive to send more troops, right?
That's not the argument now.
So like, what's the argument?
The argument is it's not specifically about ISIS. It's just that the more intelligence we gather, the less the risk, like the less the perceived risk to send
So I
troops
guess
in
like the
places
OCOs that we talk about are like not like gaining intelligence, right? They're specific.
are the ones we talk about are the ones that gain intelligence.
Okay, sure. You go.
Okay. Oh, you said that Wheeler said that a power grid attack is going to happen now.
Yeah. Well, our Wheeler Tech talks about like vital systems attacks are going to be happening right now, and then the Smith evidence that I read.
Also, non-vital systems is a thing that's different in our world.
What?
You just like you said, a power grid attack is happening now, is going to happen now
No,
while
no,
we
no.
have.
That's not our
Defense
no,
type
no, no.
operation.
Our argument is that they're like focused on defense, like sort of in the before. That's when these like sort of.
You literally said, quote, according to Wheeler, a power grid attack is going to happen now.
That's not what the Wheeler says. I don't think that's what I said. Either.
Okay, what did you say?
So I said specifically like if we focus on defensive cyber operations, always these like sort of countries have an incentive to always do this attack, or at least that's the argument I was going for. Maybe I didn't articulate it well.
Like
Maybe
none of those
I'm
words
telling
are
you
there,
now.
but yeah.
Sure. I guess again, let's go into like your impact, right? What incentive does Russia and China have to sign this agreement?
So Russia and China, and the United States also,
Yeah.
we're all expanding our global influence by doing a bunch of deals with developing countries, investment,
Okay.
trade. So we have an incentive to protect their
So like
development
Russia
process.
and China is now like close with us in cyber command, right? Compared to like conventional military where we're way ahead, right? So what incentive do they have to sort of give up their sort of advantage that they have in the cyber world to create an agreement?
I just told you, because
That
they,
doesn't make a lot
their
of sense,
priority
right?
is to expand their economic hegemony and their influence.
Why is that
They're
their
doing
priority?
that because they all want to become more powerful. Like, it's definitely more important than like a
Well,
cyber attack.
No, doing cyber attacks like that can take critical infrastructure away
No,
from the United
expanding
States
their
is
reach
definitely way
around the
more-
world is a much bigger priority.
How do they do
That's
that
just-
through this agreement?
through this agreement because they protect the economies of developing countries, which they're
Why do they
using
need
to
the
build up their
agreement for
influence.
that? Like, why do they need the agreement?
Because they would never give their technology to a developing country if the United States or China isn't. Russia wouldn't.
Okay.
Alright, it's gonna start on the next book. Is that one ready? Our argument is really simple. Right now, countries are coming together and signaling a willingness to negotiate, but global cooperation will never happen because America's use of offensive cyber operations has led to a global arms race. They give a couple of responses. First, they say the escalation is good because of MAD, but attacks are occurring right now, which obviously means that MAD is not a deterrent. So secondly, they read 3 reasons as to why countries don't want to negotiate, but they drop the ranking evidence and explain that countries are signaling a willingness to negotiate right now. The reason is simple. They realize the threat that cyber attacks can pose, and thus they want to mitigate it by signing global cooperations. So thirdly, they say the seal evidence that the US doesn't want to negotiate. Their evidence is only talking about an agreement between the United States and Russia. Our evidence, which talks about global cooperation, which our case is about, says that they are willing to negotiate. However, the Goldsmith evidence, which they never respond to, explains that the international community views the United States as a major source of cyber attacks and the cause of these cyber arms race. So no country wants to sign an agreement with the United States unless we restrict our offensive cyber operations. If the US doesn't restrain their capabilities, other countries won't. They say that these agreements don't matter because it takes a long time to form. Again, their evidence is about norms. Our argument is that information sharing, technology sharing, probably doesn't take that long. But secondly, they say that there's no enforcement. We've never, and that OCOs can enforce it. We've never used OCOs for enforcement in the past. But the ranking evidence says that countries are willing to come to the table. So if they want this negotiation and they want these agreements, then they're probably going to follow it. On the impact level, we say that developing nations are extremely vulnerable right now. The entire development process, which will lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, is based off digitization, but there's no security. We say that global cooperation facilitates the spread of defensive technology and information sharing, which secures the development process and lifts hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. On the impact, they say there's no explanation. I just gave it. Then they say that OCOs are used for intel, so it helps the developing nations. But they don't say the United States gives the information to the developing countries to secure it. But secondarily, we say that they have no defensive technology right now. Then they say we only give one example. The UN evidence explains that even if it's one example, we say that attacks are doubling. But secondarily, the UN evidence explains that the entire process is at risk if we don't secure, which means in the long term, they are vulnerable to hacks. We outweigh in a couple ways. First is on uniqueness. They drop the response that there are literally tons of other ways in which recession can occur. A housing bubble or because of uncertainty around Brexit. But there's only one way to allow for the securement of development. Remember, recessions are going to happen in the long term because they're inevitable. But our case solves back for recessions because when you allow for the country to develop, you allow it to best mitigate every future recession. Go to their case. On their first contention, they really mishandled the thrall term. We explained that the strongest recruitment method is U.S. anti-American sentiment. But we explained that one, United States using OCOs is viewed as imperialism, so it increases terrorism. But the limit evidence explains that OCOs are used in tandem with conventional military operations, and because they gather intel, they lower the perceived cost of conflict. Like Goppers explains that it acts as a pathway, not an alternative. And the loose evidence explains that the U.S. intervention has historically killed 14 million people. That's a clean link to vote. On their second contention, they dropped a couple pieces of defense. First, there are 100 ways to deter, which means that the OCOs are not unique defense to deter. But second, deterrence is not successful. Limbic explains that cyber attacks are only single use, which means that in the long term, OCOs aren't effective, but also you can delink it. The Forbes evidence explains that we've upgraded our power grids so they can't be hacked from 2019 very recently.
They see 2 times as bad.
What?
They see 2 times more attacks on Africa.
Yeah.
ISIS, cyber attacks, their case. Now we can do a little something fun to do with their internet. Is everybody ready to go?
On the ISIS turn, they say that OCOs lead to imperialism. However, they drop the AR argument that the US is going to be doing it regardless of OCOs, which means that their turn is inherently not going to happen at the point where you can't resolve it whether you have OCOs or whether you don't, which means you don't give them access, and it's not a good place to vote because there's literally no weighing on it in this debate. But more importantly, going on to our argument about cyber attacks, they go through a couple of responses that are specific to deterrence. However, our Goldsmith evidence has been in every single speech. It says that ultimately, offensive cyber operations are good because it leads to preemptive stoppages where we can take out other players' access to the internet by literally stopping them. They have only made arguments about deterrence, which means this is a conceded impact scenario about how OCOs are ultimately going to take them offline. This takes out all of the scenarios about retaliation, because if we can stop the retaliation through taking them offline, that is a very clear place to vote for us. But more importantly, they say that there are other ways that deterrence is actually going to be solved for. However, our argument is that it's about a proportional response. Our evidence is extremely good on this question. It says that OCOs are the only plausible way to deter other actors. They literally read the evidence for us. They say that offensive OCOs are currently 0.2% of the budgetary spending. That is exactly why we're seeing hacks in the developing world right now. If there was only a risk of solvency if you vote affirmative to actually ramp up the increasing of spending, because that is the risk that ultimately these attacks are going to be going away. But more importantly, on the argument about power grids, we are not going for it. I will be co-opting their impact about the developing world. More importantly, going on to their side of the flow, there's a lot of issues here as well. Firstly, at the top on the Chang evidence, they try and say that the Rang evidence says the negotiations are happening now. However, they fail to misunderstand the underlying principle between the nuance in our evidence. It says that ultimately there's going to be failure and disagreement between China and Russia because they are so close in the cyber domain. That means that those two players aren't going to be able to come together because of their interconnectedness and their similar views on the cyber domain, which means there isn't going to be this agreement that they talk about. But more importantly, at the bottom, we read this Bogower evidence that basically says that OCOs are used for intel, and they try to spike this by saying that the US doesn't give it to the developing world. However, the US does, because it's literally the same incentive of their response to the Siegel evidence. This is that the US has an incentive to come to a global agreement. This means the warranting is exactly the same. If the US has the same incentive to come to a global agreement, they have the same incentive to help the developing countries. You can literally extend their own warranting for us. That is an incentive and a reason, and an independent reason why the US government would share intel with the developing countries. More importantly, I don't know what that says, Drew. More importantly, at the bottom, they give one response about how 3 billion people, there's like one attack that did $3 billion. We will agree. Their UN evidence is scalar. It says that more attacks are going to be coming soon. This is why it's really important. They are the only risk of solvency for the attacks coming to the developing world right now, because our Goldsmith evidence ultimately says that US OCOs can preemptively take people offline. Insofar as we take down these powers that are currently hacking the developing world, we literally gain access to all of their defense or all their impacts on solving the developing world. Our argument is that the developing world is extremely vulnerable right now because OCOs are the only risk of stoppages. But more importantly, saving the developing world comes first, because ultimately we are going to be saving them from an economic collapse, and we co-opt all their impacts about an increase in wages and a decrease in poverty. We are very cleanly winning the link into this argument, and whoever wins this link should win the debate round. Because ultimately, really quickly, on their 2 times increase in cyber attack, it's 2 times increase in cyber attacks right now. Their evidence is really bad on this question. I encourage you to call for it. But more importantly, we are winning the link debate because we say that defense is ultimately failing right now through our Lewis evidence, and that offensive cyber operations are the only way to actually take out attackers who are attacking the developing world, which means we are the only risk of solvency into their argument because defense is the squad.
We see the evidence that the United States is developing countries like attack. Yeah.
Whatever you say, like, the US when they signed the agreement.
Oh, I see.
See what we did?
Yeah.
Alright, ready? Steady? Go.
Okay, so let's talk about why the United States wants to give its tech to the developing world. That's my question.
It's the warrant you extend.
Yeah,
So our warrant is that the United States will only do it if Russia and China are also doing it.
Well, no, that sort of argument doesn't make a lot of sense. Because you tell me the reason Russia and China, like there's obviously Russia, China, and the United States don't want to give tech to the developing nations just because everyone else is doing it. They want to do it because you tell me they want to sort of expand
Yes,
the global
but you
agenda
never respond to
within
our
different
argument that if, like for example, China gives their technology to a developing country and Russia and the United States are not, then the United States can scan the developing country for the vulnerabilities in their tech tech because it's much easier to do it in like developing countries than China, and now we know the problems with China's tech. So the only way that they'd all be willing to do it is if they all do it. Your coach told you this in one of the other rounds, actually.
So our sort of argument is that the United States has an incentive to sort of defend these countries through this intel, which means that the United States can then patch up these vulnerabilities that we specifically talk about through using OCOs and intel.
No. So
Okay,
we're hacking
can I ask a
development.
question?
Wait. No. I want you to keep explaining this. Wait, what did you just say?
I asked if I could ask a question because we spent a lot of time on it.
Oh, so like for example, using OCOs like against China and Russia, like we can get intel from them, which is what our evidence says, which then means we can go to these developing countries and patch up their vulnerabilities before they're
We get
actually
intel on a vulnerability in
No, we
like
get
an
intel on
African
the type of
bank
attacks
by
that-
hacking China.
We get intel on the type of attacks they're making.
Yeah, on us. Why would we be scanning for their attacks on like?
Because we want to expand our global influence into developing countries
It
and
is
help
the
them
same
expand
warrant
and help
that
us
Okay,
they
so
grow.
how can they defend
It's
against
just
it if they
trying
don't
to
have
get
the
it out.
technology?
Can I get a question?
How can they defend against it?
Can I
if
get
they
a question?
No, because you only made
Maybe
this
we spent
response
2
in
minutes
second.
on this. This is Grand
Yeah,
Crossfire
because-
where we engage in different kind of questioning. Do you mind if I get
Sure.
Thank God. All right. So, are you going for the ISIS turn, yes or no?
We'll see.
Alright, so back on this like weekend or whatever. So can you explain to me like how the United States like giving the developing nations information matters if they don't have defensive technology right now?
We help them create that
The
technology.
response is the same.
Yeah, also, it's the same reason that they would give defensive technology when there's agreement. The United States has a sort of incentive to help these developing countries, which, like,
When
obviously-
everybody signs on to an agreement, that's when they do it. Not
that
when it's
doesn't make any
just
sense.
them.
Why would they originally sign on to an agreement? They don't have an incentive to give defensive technology. Like, just because like we signed an agreement, that means it happens. The countries have an incentive to do it without an agreement.
It's
but agreement
disadvantageous,
maybe helps.
disadvantageous to us if it's just us giving the tech and not China and Russia.
I don't understand why it would be
Because
disadvantageous.
then they can
We'd
just
be
look
the
at
only
developing world and
country
they have
sort
all
of,
our tech.
we'd be the only country that sort of expanded our influence through the developing countries.
Our argument is that they would never do it unilaterally. That's why you give no evidence that they're doing it right now. We only say it occurs when
Why would
all
they never
countries
do
agree
it
to do it.
unilaterally?
Because if one country do it, they're at a disadvantage to the other countries.
All right, we're out of time.
At least that's true.
How much breath do you have left?
We're like
40 seconds.
40?
Yeah.
Time is up.
Alright. I'm starting off on their first one. The William evidence tells you that we use offensive cyber operations to gain intelligence to use in tandem with physical attacks. We tell you that this lowers the perceived risk of intervention, which increases America's use of military force. They tell you that this American imperialism will happen regardless, and there are imperialists in the American government. Our argument is that gaining more intelligence gives the political justification for the imperialist motives to happen. That's why they don't respond to the evidence that it empirically happened. When we gain more intelligence by integrating computers, Bush and Clinton use more military force than any other military commander. We tell you from the Lucas evidence that American military force has taken 30 million lives. This outweighs their case, first of all, on probability, because it has happened in the past. Second of all, on clarity, you know exactly what happens. 30 million lives have already been lost. This wins us the round. Super easy place to vote. But now let's go to our case. So they send 3 responses in their summary. Don't let them do any new ones in final focus. Our argument is that basically right now countries are saying that they're willing to engage. They tell you that Russia and China and the United States are all going to disagree. We explain that it's in their mutual incentive. There'll be a mutual incentive to share technology and information with the developing world because all of them are trying to expand their global influence by trading and investing in developing countries. So they want to secure these countries' economies. That's really important because that means if there's a mutual incentive, they will get over these disagreements. They don't respond to goals with evidence that tells you the only reason they're not getting over these agreements and signing international cooperation is because of America's use of offensive cyber operations. We win our link into our case. Then he makes 2 responses to the impact level. First of all, the United States is scanning for vulnerabilities in China and helping like African countries. This makes literally no sense. They read no evidence that America is giving this information to developing countries, and we tell you it would never happen because like our argument is that it would only happen if every country's doing it. Because the United States would never individually give up information if Russia and China are not doing it as well. This also takes out his new freaky thing that he does in second summary, because the United States would also not point out vulnerabilities and give them to developing nations if other countries are not doing the same thing. We tell you that this security development process, which can lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, we have the best link into our impact because A, our evidence is discarded, B, it's based on probable analysis. We tell you that we have helped developing countries, and yeah, that's it.
It's going to be starting on ISIS. They misunderstand the concession of the AI evidence. This sort of intelligence that we gain is going to happen in both worlds through the artificial intelligence, which means this sort of policy that we have to increase attacks actually is in both worlds. But also our rats and evidence definitely spikes this, and I encourage you to call for it. We don't have no need to report this on the ground truth if we take ISIS off the internet, which means OCOs are the best way to solve this. They also just tell you probability because it's happened in the past, but not specifically with OTOs, and their evidence definitely doesn't say that. But on our case, they have not responded to the Goldsmith piece of evidence that said we can preemptively attack and prevent countries from attacking on servers in the future, which is going to be applied to their case. At the top, they just give you like no real warrant that doesn't respond to the chain evidence that we review specifically. Russia and China do not want to create an agreement because they're so close to the United States in the domain of cyberspace that they wouldn't want to give that up. They're so far behind in conventional military that cyberspace is the only place that they have sort of disadvantage, which means they wouldn't want to give it up. Instead, they have a sort of advantage to actually do these cyber attacks, which means even if they do sign the agreement, the chain evidence says that specifically they're not going to necessarily follow it, and they're actually going to sort of lead to escalatory and still attacks. That means the only risk of offense in this round is the Goldsmith piece of evidence that says that specifically we can attack their servers and prevent them from attacking in the first place. They just tell you that countries want to create this global world, like Russia and China want to do it. There is no warrant in any of these speeches that why they would actually want to do it. Our chain evidence gives a much better warrant that they're closer in the cyber domain, which means they wouldn't want to give that up. That's specifically why Goldsmith evidence is so key on this, which they did not respond to in their final focus, that we can take their servers off and prevent African attacks. They've given you one example of attack that's happening now. We would say that's probably good evidence for us because we tell you only one attack that specifically happened right now because the rest have probably been attacked by the United States specifically. But we would tell you on this sort of idea of sharing evidence. They just tell you it has no incentive to do it because it puts them in the back front. But the Broward evidence has become great in intel. They do have an incentive to use it for developing countries because they would be the only one in the region versus being with China and Russia, which means they can expand their hegemony. Their only way you should look at this is the chain piece of analysis says that Russia and China, no matter what, are going to be doing this sort of attack, and there's no norm that we should do it. But there is only a risk of offense that sort of the Goldsmith evidence says that we can actually prevent these attacks through preemptive strikes.